How to fix the UFC.
I don't give a f.
The UFC is clearly doing a lot of things right.
TKO Holdings announced today as Paramount Plus will be the new exclusive home for the UFC starting in 2026.
They're by far the biggest and most popular MMA organization.
We're now one of the top 4 sports in the United States.
The Big Four has changed.
Exactly. The Big Four has changed.
They're making a lot of money along the way. They're creating more and more fans each and every day.
My philosophy has always been fighting is in our DNA as human beings. No matter what color we are, what country we come from, what language we speak, we like fighting.
And of course, they're just a very successful company.
We've been doing the impossible since 2001.
But they're not perfect. And in this video, we're going to be talking about a couple of different things that Dana White and the UFC brass can do to make their product even better than what it currently is.
I feel like I should apologize to the fans.
But quickly, before we get the video started, my name is JuicyMMA. I make opinionated MMA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, be sure to hit that subscribe button, as only 10% of you watching are actually subscribed. And also, if you guys want to support the channel even more, be sure to hit that join button for best bets, members only live streams, discounts off merch, alongside with additional perks as well. But anyways, let's get into it. Typically, when you ask UFC fans what the UFC can do better and how they can be more happy with the product overall, a lot of fans will point to two separate things: removing pay-per-views alongside with getting out of the Apex. But I think the UFC is solving both of these concerns, as once the UFC moves over to Paramount in January, they will be removing the pay-per-view model. Now, yes, Dana White has said that there may still be pay-per-views for gigantic cards, maybe around 4 per year, but even if that is the case, 4 pay-per-views per year is a lot better than the current 13 pay-per-view model per year that they have now. And also on top of that, there is a chance that the UFC may completely move away from the pay-per-view model entirely. And in terms of the Apex, the UFC brass has made mention that they want to expand capacity. And I think a big issue that a lot of fans have with the Apex at this point is there's just no fans there. And in turn, it kind of takes away from the experience of watching fights. But if the UFC is upgrading their capacity at the Apex, I don't think fans are going to be as unhappy with the Apex product. So in this video, we're not going to be talking about those two main concerns, but in turn, we're going to be talking about other things that I think could make improvements to the UFC. So the first thing that I think the UFC can do to make the product better overall is removing bad judges. Now, obviously with the whole betting scandal that's going on recently, there's going to be increased scrutiny when it comes to anything that looks off in any way in any particular fight. But when it comes down to judging whether the fights are rigged or whether the judges are just that inept, I don't really think it matters. At the end of the day, if a particular judge is consistently giving bad scorecards in a lot of different fights, I feel like they should be removed and I feel like they should be fired. And yes, I know the UFC doesn't technically have control over these judges or over these commissions, but at the end of the day, as I said before in the video, they are the biggest MMA organization, and at the same time, they do have a lot of power and a lot of influence over some of these commissions. And I'm sure if a judge is consistently giving out really bad scorecards and the UFC made mention of that, I have a feeling that they may be able to get the commissions to fire that particular judge. So in my opinion, I've mentioned this in a lot of my different videos, but I feel like bad judges are really ruining the sport because it is taking away wins from guys that probably should win. And I know a lot of fans in the comments may be thinking, oh, that's because the judges are rigging the fight one way or the other. That may be true, but even if they're just absolutely inept, as I said, I don't really think it matters. The end result is the same. If particular judges are consistently giving out bad scorecards, they should be removed, regardless of their motivations. Now, the next thing that I think the UFC can do to make improvements to their overall product is very similar to my last factor, but that's to remove bad refs. Because a lot of times when you talk about UFC refs, they have a very difficult job. They need to make split-second decisions in terms of stoppages. They need to make decisions in terms of taking a point away or when to not take a point away. There is a lot of things that UFC refs need to do, and of course, it's not the easiest job in the world. But at the same time, over the years, we've seen particular refs make egregious calls. Whether it's a really late stoppage, whether it's a really early stoppage, whether it's weird decisions within the fight, taking points away, standing the fights up, up, not taking points away in certain situations, there definitely have been some egregious moves made by particular judges. And I think over the years, we've seen the same type of guys or the same type of refs consistently making bad decisions as of late. Whether you talk about Jason Herzog as of late, one way or the other, I know a lot of fans think he's corrupted, but whether he's corrupted or not, he's been making a lot of weird and bad decisions lately. Whether you talk about Dan Miragliotta just not hearing the bell anymore, or whether you talk about some other refs as well making bad stoppages and bad decisions, I just think it's a negative for the sport. Of course, you don't want to go into a fight or leave a fight with some sort of controversy because the ref got involved when they probably should not have. So as I said before, yes, the UFC doesn't have total authority over making these decisions, but they do have a lot of influence. And I do think it's at the same time in the interest of the UFC to make sure bad refs are removed from refereeing UFC products. And as I said before, there are certain refs that are consistently getting themselves in controversy. I'm not talking about a particular ref that makes one bad stoppage or makes one bad decision. I'm talking about a guy who's consistently making bad decisions day in and day out. So removing guys like that would be a net positive for the overall product. But the next factor that I want to touch upon is once again kind of related to the previous two, but that's to take points away or money for eye pokes and additional fouls. Because at this point, after what happened in the Tom Aspinall fight versus Rulogan, alongside with additional fights as well, I think it's pretty clear that we have an issue here. A lot of times how fights are reffed at this point is when a fighter fouls his particular opponent, whether it's via an eye poke, groin shot, or something of that matter, a lot of times there's no repercussions at all. Yes, the fighter that was fouled gets a full 5 minutes to recover, but if he can't recover, the fight is usually a no contest, and even if he could recover, there's never a point deduction, or very rarely a point deduction. So in my opinion, I think the UFC needs to get a lot stricter on these fouls, or at the very least these refs need to get a lot stricter on these fouls. In my opinion, a way to limit some of these fouls is to take a point away immediately. At that point, I think there would be a lot less fouls because there are real repercussions for fouling your opponent, and I think the UFC should probably even go a step further than that. If a particular fighter fouls his opponent 2 times or more in a particular fight, I think a portion of his pay should be removed as well. I think at that point, it would really incentivize these fighters to not foul. Because as I said before, there's no repercussions currently at this point for a fighter fouling. If a fighter eye pokes his opponent twice or sometimes even 3 times, there's no point deduction, and even if his opponent can continue, it's just a no contest. So there's not really many repercussions at this point, and because of that, a lot of these fighters aren't being so careful with avoiding fouls, because if they do foul, they're actually going to have the advantage. Now their opponent needs to continue the fight compromised, and they don't get a point deduction or any repercussions whatsoever. But if the UFC completely flipped that on its head, and they all of a sudden became extremely strict with fouls, like taking points immediately, and even like taking a portion of the purse away, I think we're going to start to see a much lower rate of fouls occurring, because at that point, these fighters would be financially incentivized to not foul, alongside with the fact that they will probably lose a particular fight if they continue to foul as well in terms of point deductions. So yes, it is human nature, fouling is human nature, and it is going to happen, but with stricter rules, it isn't going to happen as often. Now the next and last factor I want to touch upon is matchmaking, because overall when you talk about the UFC's matchmaking, it is pretty good, but at the same time I think the UFC is missing out on some obvious opportunities. Whether you talk about Ilia Topuria fighting in Spain, I think that's a very obvious fight the UFC needs to put on for him. He was the champ at 145, now he's the champ at 155. He's probably the biggest star in the UFC at this point, and I just feel like they're missing out on a huge opportunity and putting a huge star like that in his home country of Spain. But even besides that particular fight, you also talk about the fact that the UFC seems to be missing out on some beefs that they can put together. Whether you talk about Ilia Topuria versus Paddy Pimblett in Spain, that would be a huge fight. Whether you talk about Kamaru Usman versus Bilal Muhammad, whether you talk about Yair Rodriguez versus Diego Lopez, a lot of those fights that I mentioned, 2 out of the 3 fights that I mentioned, are most likely not going to happen. And especially for Usman and Bilal, and especially for Yair versus Diego, both those fights appear to make sense a lot on paper, and also, of course, they both have beef, and usually fans like to watch fights where 2 fighters have beef. So I just feel like there's missed opportunities there for the UFC. Yes, they do a great job overall at matchmaking, but at the same time, there are some missed opportunities from the UFC's perspective in terms of their matchmaking as well. So overall, I do think the UFC is a great product. I think they do a lot of things well, but these were a couple of things that I think the UFC can change to make their product even better. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think the UFC is a perfect product, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these 2 videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out, guys.